didn't finish doing it. Okay, we are now recording.
Yeah.
Thank you for saying that because I thought I had done it. I'm going back
Go
to
ahead,
this.
Carly. Sorry.
I would have been very angry about that. Thank you.
So for any of you who have been around this campaign for a while, you know that we had 2 phases prior to this. We're now in phase 3, and it has been adjusted quite a bit. We are really looking to build the case for nonpartisan electoral maps, and the process that the People's Maps Commission is following is the process that we would like. And also we are pushing for Republican co-sponsors for the nonpartisan redistricting legislation that will be introduced, has not been yet. The steps to the goal here are lots of examples of things that people could do. And we hope they'll do them all in their teams and with other interested parties. Okay. So this is what the timeline looks like when you look at the People's Maps Commission, what's going on with the governor and the legislature. Mel will talk a lot more about this. Usually I only have one thing here because I really don't know this one, and what's going on with referendums. So the People's Maps Commission holds its final hearing this Thursday evening in the focused on the 2nd Congressional District. And this is just the beginning of their work. This is the gathering information portion of their work. All of their meetings, just so you know, are publicly noticed and are open to the public to watch on YouTube. The hearings are the opportunity for people to actually talk to the commissioners. And for everybody, the census numbers are not going to come in until late summer, early fall. And then the People's Maps Commission will be creating maps. There will be lots of draft maps that are being produced by communities that are being submitted to them. And the draft maps that they produce will be populated by census data when that comes in. We know that the legislature is actually already paying lawyers out in DC to begin, drawing maps.
Sorry about that.
That's no worries. And so not only are those lawyers, and I'm sure Mel can say more about this as well, hired to defend those maps, but they're also hired to make those maps. And so whenever they say we have to make the maps, just remind yourself and them that that's not reality. There will be nonpartisan redistricting legislation introduced. We know that Devin Draka, who has spoken to this group before, will be one of those people in the state assembly, and Jeff Smith, way long time ago, could not wait to be the first one in the Senate to introduce this, because he's been on riding this horse since 2009. This is not a new place for him. And then the legislature will submit their maps. We suspect that they will not take the People's Maps Commission maps into consideration, and the governor will veto them. And I'm not going to even talk at all about the legal part. There are 4 counties and 1 municipality that have referendums right now. Those are Bayfield. No, I'm sorry, Bayfield already passed it. Ashland, Buffalo, Richland, and one more county. Help me out. I'm forgetting. And then the city.
Don't turn it down.
That have.
Fred, can you mute yourself? Fred, could you put the mute button on, please?
I muted him.
Okay.
And the city of Appleton. So they all have referendums on the ballot for April, and they are working hard to get those passed. Polk County. So Buffalo and Polk, very red counties. Ashland, very blue, and Richland, pretty purple. And city of Appleton, I don't really know. And that's what I have for you.
Does anybody have any questions for Carlene before we move on? I can't see hands. Go ahead.
This is Alice Reed. Carlene, what has been the vote in traditionally red counties on those resolutions?
You know, that's a great question, Alice. The lowest percentage of passage was in Rusk County, very rural, very red, 57%. That's the lowest.
Yeah,
Most of them have been above 60% and some of them above 70. Oh, the overall average, oddly, 72%.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Carleen.
And
We're
I'll
going
go back to letting people in.
Okay, great. We're going to move on here. I wanted to take a minute to do just to present a quick team challenge to the group and to show you about this new form of creating a PowerPoint that I learned from Carleen. I'm now using a different system where I can do a link right from the PowerPoint. So there's two team challenges that I wanted to talk about tonight. The first one is the Fair Maps Wisconsin Facebook group, and we're going to link to it right now, and hopefully it opens up. If you are active on Facebook, and even if you're not, there is the Fair Maps Wisconsin Facebook group, and I know that my friend Nora is on the line with us tonight, and she's helping work with this group. Every week, Nora puts out an announcement. You'll see the announcement that went out yesterday. It's 3 easy things for you can do this week. It has, this is a quick one. You can contact your senator right here to demand the For the People's Act, which includes gerrymandering. You can donate, or you can cut and paste and do a sample email. So 2 things that I'd like you to strongly consider. The first is that if you are not a member of this group, it's now 1,400 members. It's grown a lot in the last couple of weeks, but I am wondering how big we can grow by April 12th. So I challenge you to put a number in the chat. If we're at 1,400 now and we have a month and you're willing to invite people, you see there's a place to invite them to this group. Could we double that number in a month? What we need to do is, this is the time when we have time to build our forces. So we need to seriously work on that. The second quick action is something that I thought we could try out. Every week, we're going to have a flyer that will be sent to you. I'm opening it up here. This is this week's. It's a complete package with a message to your legislature. This one, the theme is maps and taxes. Don't use our money for gerrymandered maps. It gives a little bit of information about it. It has a section called Consider This, which ties it back to democracy. Then the point of this is to educate, first of all, the people that are asked to send it, and to send it on to their legislatures as legislators as well. So if you don't do Facebook, and you want to communicate with your legislature, actually, I would say that even if you do Facebook, but if you don't want to cut and paste an email, you can print this, and you can print it like on a piece of paper, like the old days, and put it in an envelope with a stamp, or you can use it as a photo that you insert in an email. And I want everyone to remember that everything that they get in Madison, they log in. And if we publish one of these every week and hundreds of people send it in, they're going to be like buried in messages. And that has to do with letting people know how many people in the community care. This is always going to have a red, white, and blue patriotic theme, and there will be a new one every week. It'll go out with the weekly alert. So those are 2 team challenges. The first is, I don't know if you're doing this, but if we have 1,400 members in the Fair Maps group now, like, could we double it? Could we triple it? We've got a month to do it. And obviously you're not the only ones doing it, and nobody's going to hold you to your number, but this is a challenge for us. And then again, I would ask that people consider when you get this, the message from We the People, that in my case, I'm going to print it and put it in an envelope. I want them to have to open the envelope, but it will be in the form of a picture you can drop in. You'll get the slide deck probably tomorrow, and it has links in it. So those are the 2 challenges, the team challenge, the first part of our team challenge tonight. And now we're going to move on to, we're getting close to our guest artist. I've said to a lot of people that my view of what's going on in Fair Maps in Wisconsin is, I think of it as a 3-legged stool. We have the laws. Those are the things being done by the legislature, the good stuff and the bad stuff. So we have laws as one of the legs to the stool. And as Deb Andraka talked about that, part of the laws would be the Governor's People's Maps Commission, because that comes out of the government. And if that is adopted through the legislature, should a miracle exist, that would also become law. Then we have the courts of law, and that's where Mel will be talking about what's going on in the courts. And then we are the third leg. We are the court of public opinion. We are the people that can, as I said, we can inundate our legislature with information. We can advertise. We can bring people to the fold of this movement, because at the end of the day, a lot of change is made not by laws and not by courts, but it starts with the court of public opinion. With that said, we are going to go now to our guest speaker, Mel Barnes, who is a staff attorney at Law Forward. And you can read about her tomorrow if you want to by taking a look at the About Us. She's a delightful young lawyer. She came over from Planned Parenthood. And I'm just going to let her take it away from here. And Mel, I'm going to stop sharing so that people can put you on speaker view and take it away. And if everyone is muted, if you're not muted, if you could mute yourself now, I can go down and do that too, except Mel doesn't get to mute herself. Go ahead, Mel.
Awesome. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, everyone. It's really great to see you all tonight. So I'm going to talk about two main things. I'm going to talk about voting rights and some of the action that we've seen at the state and national level in the past couple of weeks around voting rights. And then I'm going to talk about redistricting and the fight that we're going to see in the courts over new maps. So even though, that we haven't gotten the census data, we haven't started, there's still a lot that we're doing at Law Forward to prepare for that. So I'll bring you guys up to speed on that. But let's start with voting rights. You all may have heard, in the couple weeks after the election, there was a lot of talk about things that could have gone differently with the election. I think on all sides, it was a time when it was really challenging for people to be able to get to the polls and vote in the way that they normally do because of the pandemic. And then we saw a lot of claims of voter fraud and things like that that were completely debunked by the courts. But those claims are living on now in the form of proposed legislation here in the state of Wisconsin. So there have been, at one point it was 10, but it's actually, I think, probably closer to 15 at this point, different bills circulating in the state legislature that would all attack voting rights and people's ability to vote in the state in one way or another. A huge focus of a lot of the bills is absentee voting, largely because we saw such a rise in that and the use of that over this past election cycle. So we've seen all sorts of different restrictions that legislators are considering on the right to absentee vote. Another thing that a lot of these bills have in common is they disproportionately impact folks who live in residential living facilities like nursing homes and people with disabilities. These bills are designed to really strip back some of the protections that Wisconsin currently has in law for those folks. And while we haven't seen even many of these bills formally introduced yet, at this point, they're mostly circulating in the legislature for co-sponsors, which is just the first step in the process. None of them have become law. We expect a lot of them would be vetoed if they were passed, but they are, I think, effectively continuing the conversation that we've been having in the state about what needs to be done with our voting laws. Wisconsin has a history of really well-run elections. We do it in a very decentralized way, and our local clerks really have made elections a success, secure, safe, including during this pandemic in the past year that we've seen. And the whole system that we have in the state was once pretty advanced and progressive. In the past, couple of decades, we've fallen behind some other states that have advanced options like voting by mail, expanded early voting, things like that, that Wisconsin has not adopted yet. And we have seen proposals to introduce some of those things. There's a third category of bills that I think are really just legitimately technical fixes, including making sure that special voting deputies can do their jobs in nursing homes and increased funding for that program. But the vast majority of these bills really are rolling back voting rights in the state. So keep an eye out for those. Once they're introduced, they will likely get a public hearing, and that will be really the call to action moment and the time to fight back, contact your legislators, and tell them that you do not want to see rights restricted in this way, and this is not the direction we should be moving, but we're not quite there yet. Now, on the other end, we have some really impressively progressive legislation that is being introduced at the federal level. So this is HR 1 or Senate Bill 1, and this is really an omnibus bill that would skyrocket the country into the 21st century for voting. It would set a floor of protections for the right to vote in all of the states across the country. So it would impact Wisconsin in a couple of key ways. If HR 1 became law, Wisconsin would see changes to its state laws and its state practices that would include alternatives to our very draconian voter ID law, giving voters more options for verifying their identity and expanding access to vote for people who do not necessarily have a current driver's license or something like that. We would see an expansion in early voting hours and days in the state. Wisconsin currently has in-person absentee voting, which we sometimes colloquially call early voting, for no more than 14 days before an election, and it ends the Sunday before Election Day. So I don't know if any of you have ever tried to go vote early the day before the election, but Wisconsin does not do that. HR 1 would change that and make sure that you can vote early right up to Election Day. HR 1 would also mean that would mandate secure and accessible drop boxes in the state of Wisconsin. We saw drop boxes used in many more places in this last election, but we know that they were also challenged in court. HR 1 would protect the ability to use those drop boxes and in fact make them mandatory in the state of Wisconsin. So it would not be a municipality by municipality decision. If clerks were going to use them, everyone would have access to dropping off ballots that way. HR 1 would do a lot to expand vote by mail, absentee voting. It would get rid of various things like a witness signature requirement that we do have in Wisconsin. And it would require states to establish a ballot tracking system so voters could follow their ballot status through the receipt, voting, and counting process, which would be awesome and a huge change in Wisconsin, where we're likely going to have more people continuing to vote by mail. HR 1 would also require Wisconsin to re-enfranchise those who have served their time. So folks who have a felony conviction in Wisconsin currently cannot vote, even if they're living out in the community on probation or parole. And HR 1 would say, when you are done with your time, you have been released from prison, you have your right to vote restored. It would also put an end to prison gerrymandering, which is a term that we use for how folks are counted for census purposes when they're incarcerated. So right now in Wisconsin and in most places in the country, instead of being counted in the community that they come from, where they will return to when being released, folks are counted where they're incarcerated, which means basically transferring all of that political power from places like cities where folks disproportionately come from to rural areas that have a high concentration of prisons, where most of the people who can legally vote are prison guards or employees of those prisons. So it would fix that issue that we have here in Wisconsin. And something I think will be especially exciting to this group, HR 1 would prohibit partisan gerrymandering, at least for congressional districts. So in Wisconsin, we have plenty of our own issues with our state legislative districts that would be out of reach for this federal legislation, but it would require that at least congressional districts be created through a multi-partisan committee, that they meet certain requirements to avoid partisan gerrymandering, and that the process be transparent and involve public input. So I know that everyone's like, okay, great, but HR 1 is not going to pass. I think that it is a long road ahead of this. You know, the bill has made it out of the House. That's a huge accomplishment. And we're going to see what the Senate does. You know, getting rid of the filibuster entirely to pass this on a simple majority vote is one option, but there are other options out there. My colleague Jeff Mandel did a op-ed in CNN's opinion section recently with Norm Eisen, talking about a way to pass bills through a process called democracy reconciliation. So democracy reconciliation would be removing that 60 vote threshold for democracy reform bills, similar to the way that we've removed it for budget reform bills previously in the country. So this would create basically a new way to pass these bills with a simple majority, kind of the way that the Senate was supposed to function. And this would allow the Senate to move not only H.R. 1 forward, but other bills that are essential to voting rights and things like that. Thank you, Nora, for sharing that op-ed in the chat. You guys can check that out, and that's something we'll be continuing to advocate for at Law Forward. So with that, I'll transition to the redistricting process for this cycle of maps here in Wisconsin. There's one thing that we know for sure about redistricting in 2021 in Wisconsin, and that is that the process is going to court. We will be in court one way or another. We don't have the census data yet. The legislature has not attempted to draw maps yet. We don't know if they're going to be vetoed. We don't know how gerrymandered those maps will be, but we have every reason to believe that they will be close to being just as gerrymandered as the round of maps that we're currently living under, if not worse. Unfortunately, as computers and software get better, it gets easier to create really complex partisan gerrymanders. We know that the governor is not going to sign really intensely partisan gerrymandered maps into law. We know that the People's Maps Commission will be drawing their own maps, and hopefully those will get proposed as a bill in the legislature as well. But we know that courts will get involved, and that is not just because everything is hyper partisan right now in Wisconsin. Courts have been involved in basically every round of redistricting in Wisconsin since the 1970s. So that's where we come in as Law Forward. We have been gearing up for this and preparing for this for probably over a year now, but we're taking it very seriously as we know that these maps are getting closer and closer to being a reality and that we will be in court shortly. So what are we doing if we don't have maps and we don't have the census data yet? We are preparing every sort of legal theory that we could possibly need to throw at this. We are doing deep, deep research. We are talking to the smartest lawyers and poli-sci professors around the country about ways to challenge these maps. After Common Cause v. Rucho, we know that the US Supreme Court is not going to step in if there is a partisan gerrymander, and that means that we need to explore claims that we could bring in state courts and state constitutional prohibitions on partisan gerrymandering, and it means that we'll need to make other arguments in federal court. And we are really in the stage of litigation right now where we are preparing to run down all of those different legal theories so that we can put together the best case for the state of Wisconsin. It is really detailed and really in-depth work, but we are really excited to have this time to prepare so that we can really be ready to hit the ground running when we do have maps. Okay, so I see a couple of questions in the chat that I want to turn to. Just would you explain what the case at SCOTUS revoting in Arizona would mean for voting rights in Wisconsin? Yes, so there is a case that just was heard for oral argument in the US Supreme Court. I'm going to say the name wrong, but it's like Bronovich. Maybe Debbie can correct me. This was
but after you do this question, Carlene has created a slide for you to look at with the questions. So you just limp through the name of the Arizona case, and then when you're done with that, I'll put the slide up.
That sounds good. So this law, this is an Arizona law that was challenged under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which prohibits laws that basically act like a poll tax that unduly burden minority groups and prevent them from gaining and wielding political power. The law in Arizona had several limitations on like where and when people could vote and how they could vote absentee. So some of those are being challenged. I think that litigation, that outcome will be informative to the kinds of challenges that we can bring in Wisconsin. I am skeptical that it's going to be good news after listening to the oral arguments, but we'll see. And, you know, this is one of the reasons that we have to keep developing all sorts of legal arguments, including arguments for state courts based on our state constitution. You know, that work really hasn't been done in Wisconsin in the past. But if we're going to not have US Supreme Court precedent to rely on, it means we're going to have to go somewhere else. And that is work that we're committed to doing at Law Forward, and making sure that we can also, you know, help other states with, help bring other challenges to other voting rights stuff. You know, sometimes these precedents really relate not just to redistricting, but also to other voter suppression type laws. So we will have our hands full, and hopefully be bringing forward some successful legal theories to benefit Wisconsin across the board. Awesome. Thank you, Carlene, for putting these questions together. Okay, hopefully some of the HR1 stuff I have covered, and did not see those in the chat. I apologize. So the biggest takeaway is that HR1 could be huge in Wisconsin. One of the things that is a little nuanced, that is hopefully going to get fixed in the Senate version, is that a lot of the ways that HR1 improves access to voter registration across the country, it does so by amending what's called the National Voter Registration Act, which you guys might know as the Motor Voter Law, which basically required most states starting in the 90s to allow voter registration at DMVs. Wisconsin is exempt from that law. And that's because we allow same-day registration, and we've had that law in place for a long time. However, we really need the bill to be amended to cover all states in the Senate version, so that Wisconsin can really reap the full benefits of HR1, which would, by the way, require all states to offer same-day registration, which is great, but would not necessarily be a change of the status quo in Wisconsin. What it will take to pass HR1, they will have to do something about the filibuster. You know, we can't keep requiring a supermajority to pass legislation in the Senate. It's been set up that way to stop anything from passing. And this really, HR1 is such a great example of the kind of laws that this procedural mechanism is supposed to block, because the filibuster as we know it today was honed and adopted to prevent civil rights legislation from passing, civil rights protections, things like banning poll taxes, banning lynchings. So this is really just another step in the really disgusting history of white supremacy that is the filibuster in the US Senate. So, you know, my opinion is certainly that it is time to go all together for the filibuster. But even if the Senate is not willing to get rid of it entirely, they could certainly create a path to passing this really fundamental legislation that is so key to our government functioning. I would say just as key as passing an annual budget. So I really hope that they will bring it down to a simple majority, because I think if this is passed through the Senate in a simple majority, we have the votes to do that, and people support that. Does prison gerrymandering give rise to racial discrimination? So what I will say about this is what it does is it really transfers political power from communities of color to rural white communities. When you have a situation where so many of the people who are being counted for the purpose of drawing a state assembly district, say, cannot vote in that district because they're disenfranchised because of a felony conviction, what you're doing is giving the residents of that community who can vote way more power to choose their elected representative than people who live in districts where that's not happening. And the way that that plays out in Wisconsin is a transfer of political power from more diverse, more urban communities to more rural, more white communities. And we see the results of that, not just in what our legislature looks like, who the people are adopted, but also in the policies that they are willing to support. And I will thank everyone for the very softball question of what can you do to support our work. Please, the number one thing you can do is sign up for Law Forward's email list. It's how we're going to stay in touch with everyone when the pedal really hits the metal on this redistricting litigation, because while everything might be happening behind the scenes right now, once this lawsuit is filed, things are going to start happening very quickly. So please sign up for our email list. Please follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Please share our posts. We are a very new organization. We just launched in October of last year, officially and publicly. So lots of people who we hope will be supporters in the cause and financially just don't know that we exist yet. So if you can share our emails, our Facebook posts, anything like that with 5 friends, it is truly the greatest thing that you can do to support us right now.
So are there any other questions from the floor or there doesn't seem to be any in the chat box. Does anyone else have a question for Mel? Well, you went a mile a minute. I'm going to go, which was fabulous. I'm going to go back and show another slide that I showed before. And it was part of the team challenge there. I think you all can see it. And again, it's the piece that has the Fair Maps Coalition. And Mel was talking about S1. The first thing that you can click on is that you can send a message to your senator saying you support S1. I'm not saying that your senator will necessarily listen to you, but they do log it all in. Oh, we have somebody new coming into the waiting room. So I am going to go back to the slides. That was really informative, Mel. Thank you so much. I must say that for part of the time I was working on the breakout room, so I'm going to have to listen to it later. I don't know. I'm learning a lot of new tricks, but I'm still an old dog. So thanks, Mel. So we're going to move on to, I want to go back to the concept of the three-legged stool. And while Mel is busy over there at Law Forward getting ready for the litigation, the Court of Law, and while the People's Maps Commission is doing their analysis, and while Deb Andraka is getting ready to introduce legislation and people are thinking about local referenda, I call it, but which I think is not a big issue for this group. But there are lots of other things. There are things that we can do to support all of that work because we are, after all, the court of public opinion. So the main thing that we can do is that we can shine the light on the work that is being done otherwise by other groups. Turn off my phone, sorry. And there's several ways that we can assist in those adventures. First, we can map communities of interest. I didn't mention this earlier, but we did after our last meeting. We had a meeting where there were 7 of us that got together on a Zoom. Interestingly, and it was sort of a continuation of a conversation we'd had at our last meeting. And of the 7 of us, 4 had never been to a meeting. And we all lived in Milwaukee County. And within like 20 minutes, we had identified our common community of interest. We identified, items on a map, and we started actually crafting a map. And then one of the people on the call tonight, Ann Winchell, created a map after that and submitted it to the People's Maps Commission. So we are going to, one of our breakout rooms is going to be talking about what communities you live in, what the communities of interest are. Item number 2 is when you think of communities, it's not just where we live, but it's how we network with other groups, other communities that we're associated with. I know that I'm not the only one here that's connected to the Downtown Rotary. I'm connected to Professional Dimensions, the Women's Club. We all have different groups that we're involved with. I've set up my screen with the breakout rooms ready, so I can't see everything. The third item here is, we will probably do some canvassing. Grassroots North Shore has got a really good system in place to do canvassing, to do phone banking, and they're going to be assisting us in this adventure. And it will probably be tied to item number 6, which is planting yard signs, because yard signs, the snow is disappearing and yard signs will be coming soon. The fourth item on this list is what I call share the written word. Some people are writers. That came through in the surveys that we got and like to write. And then there are people that are social. We're all social because we're here, but being social in social media. So those are 6 areas that have been identified by the survey results, by the steering committee that works with this group. And